Hello everyone, this is Dr. Nisha Nujumudeen. The topic of discussion for the day is national income and the most important indicators of national income, which is GDP, that is gross domestic product, gross national product, net domestic product and net national product. So now we all know that national income, it is indeed one of the most important topics as far as UPSC Prelims is concerned, right? So what is national income? ரொம்ப ஒரு simple termல சொன்னாக்கா it is nothing but the total income of a country, right? And now அது எப்படி நம்ம define பண்ணுவோம்? It is defined as the value of all final goods and service that is produced in a country for which period? For a period of 1 year. Now இந்த particular national income எல்லா கண்ட்ரிக்குமே ரொம்ப important. ஏன்னா இந்த national income base பண்ணி தான் ஒரு கண்ட்ரியோட strength இல்ல weakness வந்து நமக்கு தெரிய முடியும் இல்லையா? So now in the particular national income, there are 4 indicators of it. Adala vandu, the most important indicator is gross domestic product. And now GDP pathanaka, it is indeed again one of the hit list topic as far as prelims is concerned. So what is GDP? GDP is defined as the value, or let's say the total output or the total monetary value of all final goods and services which is produced within the domestic territory of a country. Adada within the domestic means within the geographical boundary for a period of 1 year. So நம்ம என்னென்ன goods produce பண்றோம்? For example, நம்மள்கிட்ட வந்து if you see we have 3 sectors in an economy. What are they? Primary, secondary, tertiary sector. Primary sector naka all the activities based on agriculture and related, or let's say allied activity, right? Your farming, fishing, forestry, mining, all these activities comes under that. And then what is secondary sector? It talks about the manufacturing sector. And third is the tertiary sector. In the last sector, what is the final or the total output that you produce in your country? That is equal to GDP in simple terms, right? So now there are 4 keywords that you should remember as far as GDP is concerned. One is the value of all the final goods and service. Second point, Patinaka, whatever is produced within India, which means within the domestic territory or geographical boundary. And now, எல்லா வருஷமே வந்து நம்ம countryயோட output, in simple terms output னு சொல்லும். அதாவது GDP calculate பண்ணோம். And now, the fourth point is irrespective of nationality, which means that, for example, I am an Indian, right? நான் வந்து அமெரிக்கால ஒர்க் பண்றேன். நான் வந்து இந்தியால இருந்து ஒரு பிரைமரியிலயோ செகண்டரியிலயோ டெர்ஷரி செக்டர்லயோ ஒர்க் பண்ணல. So அப்படின்னு இருக்கும்போது when I am staying in America, no matter I am an Indian also, because I am not working within the domestic territory or boundary of India, my contribution will not be taken into consideration for India's GDP, which means that irrespective of nationality, that is for example, an American or a Japanese or Australian citizen is working in India. அவங்க Indian citizen கிடையாது. ஆனா அவங்க நம்ம கண்ட்ரிக்குள்ள domestic territoryக்குள்ள production பண்றாங்க. இல்லனா அவங்க வந்து they actively contribute in the production process of our country. Then irrespective of their nationality also, their contribution is taken into consideration for India's GDP. This is the most important point that you have to keep in mind while you study GDP. That is, Indian citizens, if you are an NRI means, now, you are not staying within India, so then your contribution cannot be considered for India's GDP. Whereas the foreign nationals or foreign citizens, if they are within a country, then yes, their contribution is taken into consideration for calculating India's GDP. Now, in the GDP la vandu, or most interesting aana vishayam paathanaka, if you see that we say that GDP is what? It consists of the value of all final goods and service, right? Now, value of all final goods and service னு பாக்கும்போது என்னென்ன நம்ம கண்ட்ரில ப்ரொடியூஸ் பண்றாங்களோ எல்லாமே நம்ம கால்குலேட் பண்ணுவோம், நம்ம எல்லாமே இன்க்ளூட் பண்ணுவோம். அப்படி கிடையாது. There are certain exemptions, which means சில items வந்து GDP ல இன்க்ளூட் பண்ண மாட்டா. அதாவது for example, items or activities like gambling, smuggling and illegal activities, murder for hire. நான் சொல்றேன், ஹே நான் 50,000 தரேன், அவன் தலை வெட்டிட்டு வான்னு சொன்னா அது வந்து எப்படி ஜிடிபில வர முடியும் இல்லையா? I know it sounds funny, but that is the reality. Murder for hire, which means that you're giving somebody money which is not accountable or money that is not actively contributing in the production process of a country. Those kind of activities are never included in India's or let's say in any country's GDP calculation. Adhe mari if you see service of a maid or service of a household. For example, your father, your mother, your sisters, even the domestic help or servants, they work at your home, right? Now, are we paying for them? For a father, mother, relatives, we are never paying for the household works they do. Maybe or a domestic help, illana or a maid, kandipa we pay them. But now, andamari service ellame vandu, we don't take into consideration for calculating India's GDP. Why? Because in the activities edume vandu, it do not contribute in the production process of a country. That is the reason they are not calculated or taken into consideration. Adhe mari, the few other items that are excluded from GDP calculation is gifts. We receive a lot of gifts. Gifts vandu not the gift what your friend gives you. Rather, India receives gifts and grants from other countries, right? All these are not included in the calculation of GDP. Now, for example, உங்களுக்கு ஒரு கார் இருக்கு. 2024ல நீங்க வாங்குனீங்க. சரியா? 2025ல வந்து நீங்க அது விக்கிறீங்க. Which means it became a second hand product. So 2024ல 10 லட்சம் கொடுத்து ஒரு கார் வாங்கிட்டு 2025ல வந்து when you're selling it for 8 lakhs means that particular transaction again doesn't come under the current year's GDP calculation. ஆனா அந்த கார் செல் பண்ணும்போது there is something called as after sale service or commission or brokerage charges. These are included. So now second hand goods or used goods are not included in GDP calculation. But commissions, brokerage charges and after sale services, they are included in the calculation of GDP. So this is the most important point that you have to keep in mind as far as GDP is concerned. Prelims examination la vandu what are the activities or items that are not included in GDP mari they can ask you. If you see, நம்ம definition வந்து என்ன சொன்னோம்? Whatever is produced within the domestic territory னு சொன்னோம் இல்லையா? For example, Indian Embassy. Indian Embassy வந்து இந்தியால இருக்காது இல்லையா? So Indian Embassy can be in America, can be in Japan, can be in Australia. So now they are not located within the domestic territory or boundary of our country. Ana, the exception of GDP is that Indian embassies abroad and certain activities like shipping and airway activities are also included in the GDP calculation of our country, India. So these are the exceptions also, irrespective of the fact that the definition of GDP tells you about the fact called as within the domestic territory. அப்படி சொன்னா கூட இந்த மாதிரி எக்ஸெப்ஷன்ஸும் இருக்கு. This is something that you need to keep in mind. Now, this is what you should know with regard to GDP in simple term. யாருக்காவது GDP புரியலனா ஒரு சிம்பிளான ஒரு பாயிண்ட் நான் சொல்றேன், அது மைண்ட்ல வச்சுக்கோங்க. நம்ம கிட்ட 3 செக்டர்ஸ் இருக்கு. பிரைமரி, செகண்டரி, டெர்ஷரி இல்லையா? ஃபார் எக்ஸாம்பிள், பிரைமரி செக்டர்ல வந்து I am producing tomato, onions, potato. For example, இது produce பண்ணும்போது என்னுடைய output வந்து let's say for example ₹50. ஓகேவா? இது வந்து primary sector. அதாவது agriculture sector and related activity. அதே secondary sector which talks about what? The industry and manufacturing sector. அதில வந்து let's say for example the tomato வந்து we are making a tomato ketchup or let's say ஒரு potato chips or a onion pakoda. So in the secondary sector la vandu இந்த மாதிரி products sell பண்ணும்போது automatically what happens? You get let's say total output of ₹100. இந்த produce பண்ற tomato ketchup இருக்கட்டும், potato chips இருக்கட்டும், இல்லனா onion pakoda இருக்கட்டும், you have to make sure that it reaches the market. For that you need what? The third sector of the economy. For that transport, communication, wholesale, retail, all these activities are necessary. So now அதெல்லாமே பண்ணி the contribution of tertiary sector will be, let's say, ₹200. Now, what is GDP? P plus S plus I, which is 50 plus 100 plus 200. So, in simple terms, GDP will be ₹350. That's it. ஆனா இதுல வந்து எல்லா ஐட்டம்ஸுமே இன்க்ளூட் பண்ண மாட்டாங்க. That is why I told you that there are so many exceptions in certain activities or certain items to be included in GDP. That you have to keep in mind. What is included, what is not included. The major items or the activities I have told you. So remember and keep that in mind. Now, having said that, if you see GDP, normally we calculate GDP every year. That is what the definition tells. Nama concept paathutom, adoda applications upa paathutom. Now, it is very important that when you study economics, you need to always interlinkage or connect them with the current affairs. And our questions kekkumbodhu adu base panni da kepanga illaya. So now, normally GDP calculation happens annually or every year. But as far as the country India is concerned, GDP is also calculated quarterly. So now India la vandu quarterly plus annually. இந்த ரெண்டு விதத்திலயும் வந்து GDP என்ன பண்ணுவா? Calculate பண்ணுவா. Now, a quick look into certain more or let's say another current affairs of GDP. 2015 varaikku if you see, in our country India, GDP was calculated using a different methodology. இப்போ 2015 க்கு அப்புறம் till today a new methodology or a new method is followed. So let's have a quick look into what are the changes in the methods of calculating GDP after 2015. Point number 1 is GDP is calculated today at market price. Now, for that, you should know what is factor price and market price. Let's quickly, or 30 seconds, let us see what is factor price and what is market price. Or let's say factor cost and market price. Both are same. Factor cost or factor price means in simple terms, the price from the point of view of the producer. For example, I am producing a shoe, a leather shoe. Now, in the leather shoe na produce பண்ணும்போது எனக்கு வந்து raw material is what? Leather. I need laborers to work for it. அதுக்கு நான் wages கொடுப்பேன். அவங்களுக்கு wages I'll pay for them. அதுக்கப்புறம் my electricity charges, rent charges, all these things I take into consideration. அதுக்கப்புறம் என்ன பண்ணுவான்? I'll fix a price for it. Now, in the particular product வந்து factoryல தான் இருக்கா. இல்லையா? It is in the factory. It has not gone out of the factory. So now, the cost incurred by the producers or the input cost incurred by the producers at their factory is called as factor cost or factor price in simple terms. Now, this factor cost or factor price is also called as input cost. ஏனா இப்போ நான் வந்து shoe produce பண்ணோம்னா definitely I can go for a loan or I can go for other aspects. Now, I am eligible to get what? Subsidies, right? Now, in the particular factory la produce பண்ற shoeக்கு வந்து for example, I have kept a price of 200. Now, இது வந்து factory price. இதுல வந்து tax கிடையாது. என்ன tax? Indirect tax கிடையாது, right? So now, factor cost or factory price is always having an advantage of not having a possibility of the inclusion of indirect taxes. Factor cost includes subsidy and it minuses indirect taxes. Now, me and you, we don't go and purchase at the factor price or the factory cost. We buy the products from the market, right? In the leather shoe வந்து marketல வரும்போது 200 rupeesக்கு sell பண்ண மாட்டாங்க. They will sell it for let's say 300 rupees. ஏனா wholesalers, retailers, அவங்களோட profits எல்லாமே we take into consideration. And we'll put a price called as let's say 350. And now this 350 will be what? The price that I and you as a normal consumer pay to buy this particular leather shoe. It consists of the profits plus what? The indirect taxes. And we the consumers feel the pinch of paying higher prices while purchasing this product. இந்த ஒரு particular reason நால என்ன பண்ணாங்க? 2015ல வந்து the government decided to change the methodology of calculating GDP from factor price to market price. Why? Because market price consists of indirect taxes. It is market price is equal to factor price minus subsidy and plus indirect taxes, because that reflects the real living standard of the population, right? This is one change. Adhe mari, the second important change after 2015 is that GDP was calculated using a base year called as reference year. And the base year or the reference year was 2004-05 and now it is 2011-12. So currently the base year is 2011-12. Now, base year is what? Or a benchmark year. It is a reference year. That what they do is that ஒரு certain period of yearsல வந்து எந்த particular வருஷத்துக்கு வந்து எந்த விதமான பிரச்சனையும் கிடையாது. It is a very normal year without any abnormalities, without any pandemics, without any inflationary issues, pressures or shocks. The economy is moving very smoothly. அந்த மாதிரி இயர் சூஸ் பண்ணுவாங்க. பண்ணிட்டு அந்த இயரோட பிரைஸ் வந்து ஃபிக்ஸ் பண்ணும். எதுக்கு? டு கால்குலேட். இல்லைன்னா என்ன ஆகும்னா always there'll be fluctuations because of inflation and price rise and all. So now that is the reason we always calculate GDP using base year reference or base price. So now the base year here it is 2011-12. From 2004-5 irundha 2011-12 we changed. As far as 2025 current affairs is concerned, or 2 years back if you see, 2 to 3 years back if you see, there was a discussion conducted stating that 2017-18 வந்து we can take or we can consider as the new base year. Ana due to certain reasons like the after effects of demonetization or the introduction of GST and all, that particular proposal was not accepted. It was put forward by the MOSPI ministry, but it was not accepted. And now in 2024 December, if you see, again another committee was put forward stating that going forward from 2025 onwards, we can change the base year to 2022-23 or 23-24. But still it is yet to be implemented. So ad implement agra varikume vanda even today the base year is 2011-12. That is the current affairs of base year also. Okay. And now the next important change in the methodology of calculating GDP is there is something called as GVA, the introduction of GVA. GVA means gross value added. In simple terms, what is GDP? GDP vande we take into consideration the value of all final goods and services produced within the country, right? And that of all the sectors. GVA or gross value added means again the total value of all goods and services produced in one particular industry, in one particular region, in one particular sector or in one particular area. For example, I want to know what is the total output of agricultural sector or primary sector, or what is the total output from this particular area. Now, one particular industry area or sector மட்டுமே focus பண்ணி அதோட output மட்டுமே நம்ம எடுத்தனாக்கா that is called as gross value added in simple term. It is a mini version of GDP, right? So now this concept called as GVA was introduced in 2015. So the calculations became more easy. That is another current affairs. The next important point or the change in the methodology of calculating GDP after 2015 is incorporation of a ministry called as MCA, Ministry of Corporate Affairs. Previously data ellam vande IIP, that is Index of Industrial Production and Annual Survey of Industry. Based on this solely we used to calculate what? We used to calculate datas. But now for a very, very structured and systematic calculation, the government came up with something called as incorporation of MCA into the calculation of GDP. So you have to keep that in mind. The next important change in methodology is change in the method of calculating agriculture income. So 2015 க்கு அப்புறம் என்ன பண்ணிருக்குன்னா the value of byproducts like skins of animals, hides, meats, all these byproducts also, they started taking into consideration the value of that in the calculation of what? GDP. So these are the major changes that was brought in. And last but not the least, another change that was brought in the calculation of GDP after 2015 was the introduction of ELI. ELI means effective labor input method. அதாவது முன்னாடி if you see ஒரு லேபர் வந்து அது பிரைமரியில் பிரைமரி செக்டரில் வேலை செய்யட்டும் இல்லைன்னா செகண்டரி செக்டரில் வேலை செய்யட்டும் அவங்களுடைய எஃபிஷியன்சி வந்து ஒரே மாதிரி இருக்கும்னு நம்ம அசியூம் பண்ணிகிட்டே இருந்தாங்க. Now, effective labor input methodனாக்கா based on the efficiency or the productivity of the labor, we'll start calculating it. So it is very specific in nature. So that is again indeed very important, right? So that is another introduction in the calculation of GDP after 2015. Around 6 to 7 points I have told you now. I hope it is very clear for you. So these are the major points that you need to keep in mind while you study GDP. Last but not the least, we all know that what is the rank of our country India in terms of GDP? As far as recent data is concerned, India ranks number 5 in the entire world economy as far as GDP is concerned. And now by 2027, according to IMF, we aim to become the third largest economy. And it is said that India aims to be a US dollar 5 trillion economy by 2025. But now again, that is too early. So we've shifted it to 2027. And by 2032, India aims to become US dollar 10 trillion economy. So we have to wait and see how far this has been practical for us. So thus I can tell you that after the changes in the methodology of calculation of GDP only, today we are having a very scientific, systematic and structured way in calculating the total output called as gross domestic product for our country, India. So these are the major points that you have to keep in mind while you study GDP. So when you see any questions based on GDP, I hope you'll be able to answer them. Thank you and Jai Hind.
Veranda IAS, where your dream becomes reality.